Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 14 of the Memorial Memo KSR's Kentucky Women's Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Friends of Cole. Katie, we're going to get through it pretty quick, but we have a loss to talk about, but a win and hopefully some future wins to dive into. Kind of before we dig into everything, how are you?
I'm doing really good. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. It's hard to complain after a win over Tennessee, and on the men's basketball side.
Yeah.
I know you all probably can't see, but I'm wearing my John Rothstein, Mark Pope, Keeping the Faith shirt in honor of that win. So vibes are high. Hopefully that was a good precedent for what's to come here on the women's side for us.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, coming off a 1-1 week, it's hard to be upset because it's looking into what's going to be a great week of competition. So I'm just really excited to get into this episode.
And then we're going to go ahead and start it, Katie. We have just some ranking, again, kind of like how we start all the time, some ranking stuff, right? Kentucky, they were number 11 in the AP poll. They slipped to number 12. I don't think you can really complain. There was a lot happening there. There were a lot of losses, and of course that means, hey, if you beat Texas A&M, you're probably a top 10 team. But when you only slip one spot after that kind of loss, Katie, I don't think you can be too mad. Kentucky also slipped in the net rankings from like 17, 18. They kind of fluctuated over the course of a few days down to 22.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was expected. I feel like neither of us really expected Kentucky to drop a lot. So for them to only drop one spot, I would say is pretty good considering the loss was on the road. So, I mean, to the Associated Press, it probably looks better that Kentucky was on the road against a decent team. But, yeah, definitely happy with where they are right now.
I think the main thing is now we're all Texas A&M fans. We're all, of course, now we have comments now because we're actually going live rather than being a little bit pre-recorded. But I think the main thing, Katie, is that now we're all Texas A&M fans. We are live this time to that comment. Yes, we are. But I think that, like I said, now you hope A&M somehow goes undefeated to fish conference play. They won't. But you want them to win. You want them to do good. Kind of the same thing with North Carolina there. Of course, North Carolina, they lost to Florida State on a buzzer beater. So that's unfortunate, but Florida State's also a really good team. But regardless, moving on, Katie. Kaylin Carroll, who, we're talking about this year's team. We're talking about, Kenny Brooks' first year at Kentucky. But Kaylin Carroll, who, top 15 kid, committed to Kentucky next season, is a McDonald's All-American. She is the first McDonald's All-American, the first burger girl, as they would say, since Treasure Hunt in the 2020 class. Maddie Shear was also a McDonald's All-American, but she, of course, committed to Oregon out of high school, and Kaylin Carroll, now the 9th player in program history, and the first, or actually all of them since 2010. Kaylin Carroll, name is not quite spelled like that, but you know what? I like the spelling on the screen. Kaylin Carroll, again, I think it's interesting. All of Kentucky's All-Americans, McDonald's All-Americans since 2010, and of course making her the 9th in program history. Katie, Kentucky's just getting a very talented player coming in next year.
Yeah, and it definitely takes me back to that 2013 season, which granted I was very young at the time. So me now looking back on the 2013 season, I remember Michaela Epps and Lene Harper, I think, was the other All-American from that class. But two very talented players, and and we've seen with Maddie Shear that these McDonald's All-Americans are no joke. They are very good players, so I'm very excited to see what she can do here. And I'm hoping that as a freshman she can make an impact, especially since Brooks has made it clear that he likes a more experienced roster. But I think that she's good enough to kind of be one of the first players off the bench, if not starting off the rip.
It's one of those things like Lexi Blue. I thought she would be a starter just because she's she was number 38, a top 40 kid in her class. But, of course, Kaylin is the one not Kaylin, but Lexi Blue, not starting. But, Kaylin, top 15 kid. Now, Kentucky is returning everyone, so I don't think she will start. But I do think she'll have probably more of an impact than Lexi Blue is having this season, I guess, if you want to put it like that. But then again, Lexi Blue, she's going to have an increased role too. So there's definitely a lot to play there, but it's good to have a player like that coming into your program. But Katie, Just getting on to the games. Again, we're going to go through this quick because who wants to talk about a loss, right? Who wants to sit here and, especially after you just won, talk about a loss? But we'll go ahead and kind of just, I guess, recap that one too. Kentucky, they took their second loss of the season when they went to College Station, lost to Texas A&M 61-55 on the road. Just not the prettiest game of all time. And I want to sit here and say it was a one-off game. And I guess this is the question that I'll ask you. I feel like, is this a one-off kind of game where Kentucky, they're 1 of 18 from 3, can't make anything? Or do you think there are some kind of bigger issues lingering from that game?
I don't know. I almost think that it's a one-off game because, it's unfortunate to almost waste such a great game from Tiani Key, who, kind of needed that game to get back into a rhythm. I don't know. You have Clara Strack, who typically does not only shoot 2 of 12 from the field. That was just really unfortunate. I think it was almost one of those games where nobody was really on, and I feel like that can happen a lot of times with away games. I don't think that there's anything really to worry about because it wasn't even high scoring by Texas A&M. So I didn't even see any defensive issues. But of course, what do you think about that? Because I don't really see anything that I'm worried about.
I think and I know it was Arkansas, but considering you came back and you handled them pretty good, I think I am going to kind of lean. 1 of 18, that is one-off. Like that, yeah. That alone is kind of one-off. And I guess, kind of like, I think Kenny said this maybe even after the Arkansas game. He was like, well, if we would have made literally 2 or 3 more threes against, if we go 3 of 18 or 4 of 18, we win that game. But regardless, you lost. 8 assists, overall. Georgia Amore averages about 8 herself. Just not a great game. Mm-hmm. I do want to highlight, though, Tiani Key, Katie. She had a career-high 20 points on 8 of 16 shooting, 9 rebounds. It was really good to see her kind of, even in a loss, be able to bring, again, and they talked about this postgame, the energy that this team really needs, the effort that this team needs.
I also think it's worth noting that this team only had 10 assists. I don't know what they're averaging right now, but I think that it's more than 10 assists per game, or 10 turnovers. I'm talking about turnovers. They only had 10 turnovers. I think that right now Kentucky's averaging more than 10 turnovers. So I feel like it just shows that there was nothing wrong with this game besides the shooting. And so for Tiani Key to do so well from the field, Georgia Amore still had 15 points, but she didn't make a single 3-pointer, which is super weird for her. Everybody just kind of was not able to shoot. The ball was not dropping, and I don't think that that's going to become the norm, and clearly it didn't because they came back against Arkansas and played great.
And then, you talked about Georgia, 0 of 8 from 3, 15 points. Your next man up was Deja Lawrence, who didn't even have a great game herself. 8 points and then 5 rebounds. And of course, as Matt G is saying down there, they missed 1,000 shots and nothing was falling, and it just seemed like everything was, again, one-off, as we were kind of saying. I do think, though, it just kind of goes to show, when you're relying on 5 starters and those 5 starters aren't hitting. Now, to be fair, I guess it's easy for Kenny to be like, well, if one of those people hit 2 more threes, we're fine. But it just doesn't seem like that's probably the greatest thing in the world. But at the same time, Katie, you lost 1 game. It was on the road. It is a quad 2 loss of all things. It's not a quad 3 or quad 4. It's a quad 2 loss. And so that's definitely good too. But Katie, how about that Arkansas game? We have one coming up Saturday when John Calipari comes to town, but there's also one here on the women's side, Arkansas, that came into Memorial Coliseum, and they got bounced pretty good. 89-69 win for the Cats. Get out to a 29-10 lead in that first quarter. And again, it's like you coasted to a win. You win by 20 after being up by 19 after the first quarter. But I don't know if I can, that may just kind of be what this team is. I guess it's hard to kind of say too much more about that. But Kentucky, they come out much needed win, Katie, after losing on the road.
Yeah, and Arkansas didn't really have a bad game themselves. They went 12 of 29 from 3, which is more than we had seen. And that almost poses some defensive issues, unlike what we saw against Texas A&M. Just the perimeter defense, I think, might need a little bit of work. But again, it's hard to stop Izzy Higginbottom when she has 30 points. Like, she was just
Yeah.
on fire. But yeah, I mean, I think the game as a whole was decent. I thought it was a good game, and to bounce back with a 20-point win is definitely what they needed.
Arkansas, it's like you hit on. Izzy Higginbottom scored 32 of their 69 points, and it's like, I guess they didn't play their worst game in the world. I mean, they kept Kentucky to only a 20-point lead versus a 40-point lead, but it's just one of those things where, like, if they didn't have her, and I think I brought this up to you at one point during the game, I was like, if they didn't have her, they might be the worst team in the country. Like, I hope Mike Neighbors sticks around. He seems like a nice guy, but I would imagine that seat, if it's not hot, it's at least a little bit warm. Katie, I thought it was interesting. Kentucky, after going 1 of 18 from 3 against Texas A&M, they start 2 of 4. So already you've already, 4 shots in, you're having a better game than you did in College Station. They finished 13 of 28 from 3, about as good as you could ask for, other than that one night. I don't even remember that Mississippi State game when they hit the program record 17, 18 threes. That's about as good as you can ask for. Georgia
Yeah.
Amore led the way with 19 points, more efficient from the field this time, 7 of 12, 1 of 3 from deep, 8 assists, 2 steals. Katie, it's just, again, it's so good to see that Georgia Amore, even after a bad game, she doesn't let it become a bad stretch of games. She's able to bounce back and be a big contributor, and, Kentucky really needs that.
Yeah, I think this was one of those games that we had been seeing from her earlier in the season, where she's a little bit more focused on distributing the ball. She was only 1 of 3 from 3, but I mean, she contributed points wise, and so even though she's not shooting those 8 or 10 threes like we've been used to now, I think she did a great job otherwise. And I mean, obviously, you're going to be happy with 19 points. There's nothing to complain about with her.
Right, and then there's Claire Strack, who had 17 points and 10 rebounds for her 9th double-double of the season. You're up to, how many games now are we up to, Katie? We're 17, so 19 games, having a double-double in about half of those games. Not too shabby. She also had 4 blocks, by the way, so it's kind of giving us, like, a flashback to what it was like early in the season when it just seemed like this team was blocking every single shot that was being shot at them. But again, really good game from Claire Strack too, Katie.
Yeah, I mean, for her to only have 6 points against Texas A&M, there was definitely some motivation going into this game to not do that again. So I think that this Arkansas game was a confidence builder, not just for her, but probably for the rest of the team when it comes to shooting and just being more efficient.
It's just one of those things where I think what's really good about this team, now I guess you could argue in the NCAA tournament you don't have another chance, but let's just talk about the regular, kind of the way winding down the end of the regular season though, Katie. It's really nice to see that this team could have one bad game, but then immediately make up for it the next, right?
Yeah.
I think it's really refreshing because in this next month, and we're about to talk about it with our 2 games we're about to preview, you're going to have tough games. You just are. You're going to have games where you lose. Maybe they don't. Maybe they somehow finish the year 26-2 and we're the best team in the country. But assuming you lose, well then there's going to be tough games. It's going to be really important, Katie, to bounce back.
Yeah, I agree with that, especially with the stretch coming up. I think this win against Arkansas was very important because if you went into these next few games losing to Texas A&M and Arkansas, your confidence level is probably going to be on the floor. So, I mean, it was really good to just have a game where Kentucky could kind of dominate the entire time and be able to show off what they do best.
And then there was Deja Lawrence and Amelia Hassett. Both of them shot 4 of 8 from 3-point range, scoring 14 points. Got a lot more from them than you did against Texas A&M. But then Katie Tiani Key, after having a really good game against Texas A&M, kind of brought it again against Arkansas, 13 points and 11 rebounds. It's her 7th double-double in the year. And Katie, as far as I could tell, she's 2 rebounds away. She had like 2 games with 9 rebounds. She was 2 rebounds away from having 9 double-doubles too, just like Claire Strack. And I think that's really impressive for her. And obviously when you have someone who can fill up a stat sheet like her, that's obviously going to be good for your team moving forward.
Yeah, she's definitely one of the more consistent players, I think, filling up the stat sheet across the board because even if she doesn't have, 18 or 19 points, she's still contributing in other ways besides scoring. So those 11 rebounds are really important to the way that this team operates, and I think that she does a great job with that.
And then Katie, We got 2 games to preview, but before we do, I want to give a quick shout to our friends at Friends of Cole for sponsoring this episode. Friends of Cole is dedicated to informing and educating Kentucky citizens about the coal industry and its vital role in the state's future. We provide a united voice for an industry that has been and remains a critical economic contributor to Kentucky. By working together, we can provide good jobs and benefits for future generations. Coal is resilient, reliable, and affordable. Friends of Coal is a volunteer organization. All are invited to be a part of our organization, which consists of proud Kentuckians as well as residents from beyond our borders. Head to friendsofcoalkentucky.org to learn more. But yeah, just kind of moving on, Katie. You know, you talk about you lose to A&M, you get a bounce-back win. Well, now you got to add on to it. You can't bounce back and then get set back again, right? You have to play Alabama on Thursday, which, Katie, Alabama, they come into the season as the projected to finish 6th in the SEC. They have some very good players in their team. They're a pretty solid team all around. They're currently 17-4 and 4-3 in the SEC. So they only lost one non-conference game. And again, I know the SEC is a different beast, but this kind of goes to show how good Alabama is. I do think it's also worth noting, Katie, I think it's the first time we've seen this season with like a theme for like a game. This is a whiteout game for Kentucky. UK released, a graphic, and they're like, "Hey, wear white. Come out, show out, wear white." So I think that's good to see, Katie. But that also just goes to show how big this Alabama game coming up really is.
Yeah, it is really big, especially because these teams are practically neck and neck this season. I mean, being 17-4 with Alabama, they've obviously played more games than us because we've had 17-2. But I think that for them to be coming to Memorial with a hopefully really good crowd, they definitely are at a disadvantage. But like you said, they have some great players like Sarah Ashley Barker, who I'm assuming we'll talk about in a second. It's a little bit worrying, but you don't want to go into it pessimistic. So I think that we should just kind of dive in.
I'm actually really optimistic about this game because it's at home. If this was on the road, I don't know. But, I guess we kind of started doing this. You look on Ticketmaster and you're like, okay, how many tickets are left? And it's actually, it's not a sellout, obviously, but getting there. It's, I think there's less than like 200 or 300 seats left, which you think 200, 300, that may, whatever. But in an arena of over 6,000 people, and those tickets are selling, as we speak, and I looked at that a few days ago, like, it's going to be a pretty good crowd. May not be Louisville, but it should be a really good crowd. Katie, like you said, we're going to talk about her, but before we do, Alabama, Katie, and this is kind of just, it applies to Sarah Ashley Barker, their whole team, they can shoot the three. Alabama is 2nd in the SEC and 9th in the country, top 10 in the country. When it comes to three-point percentage, they shoot 37.4% from deep. So I think before you even dive into Sarah Ashley Barker, who's a tremendous player, you dive into Zay Green, who dive into all these players. I think the main thing y'all know about Alabama, and again, it's kind of like Nate Oates' Alabama team on the men's side. They're gonna shoot the three, and they're gonna kill you by the three. But at the same time, if you can run them off that three-point line, you can be successful.
Yeah, I talked about this just a second ago about the Arkansas game, but perimeter defense is going to be very important. And I feel like Kentucky has had some games where the perimeter defense hasn't really been there. But I think that is kind of where Deja and Georgia come in. I think that Deja is such a great defensive player. It's going to be really important for her to be locked in, but also for Georgia to be able to put pressure on the three as well. And then, of course, they have some bigs that I think can shoot threes. So, Clara Strack is going to have her hands full. Amelia Hassett's going to have her hands full. Every single player on that court has to be prepared to defend the perimeter, and hopefully they can lock in and do that.
It's kind of like a strength against strength kind of thing. Alabama, tremendous offense, tremendous shooting team, and you have Kentucky, who's this pretty solid defensive team, getting better at scoring the ball. But Kentucky, I think, at least especially really early in the season and kind of leading up to this point, defense has surprisingly been their strength. And it's just going to be interesting, when fire meets water. I guess water typically puts out fire, but you get what I mean. Like, it's going to be interesting to see what kind of wins out there. We said we're going to talk about her, so might as well, right? Sarah Ashley Barker. She's preseason first team All SEC. That's basically All American territory you're talking about. Like when you start, Katie, when you start talking about first team All SEC, talking about Georgia Amore being that, talk about Sarah Ashley Barker being that, Reagan Beers for Oklahoma, who we're about to talk about in a minute. Those are players who can be All Americans, and truly one of the best players in college basketball, averaging 6.9 points and 6.1 rebounds per game.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at stats from last season, which, of course, these are two completely different teams. These Kentucky teams, you cannot compare them. But last season, Sarah Ashley Barker dropped 34 points on Kentucky. That was in Tuscaloosa. So hopefully, like you said, with the home court advantage, it kind of messes with the rhythm a little bit. But I mean, they have some very, very, very talented players. I'm sure that Kenny Brooks has taken a lot of time to study them. I'm sure that every player on Kentucky has taken time to watch their film. So I think that they know exactly what they need to do. It's just a matter of execution.
And it's just one of those things, like, she's obviously one of the best players in the SEC, but she does so much that's like, I feel like it could be a pretty significant matchup problem for Kentucky, and that worries me a little bit. But she also comes into this game, Alabama did lose to Vanderbilt in their last game, and I'm pretty sure it was at home. So Alabama loses to Vanderbilt, and you're like, well, we beat Vanderbilt by 20 on the road. This should be fine. Well, Vanderbilt's also better than what they showed against Kentucky, too. And by the way, that win looks better and better by the day. Like, they beat Tennessee, they're beating Alabama now. That Vanderbilt win is looking great. Kind of like Mississippi State, they're losing games they shouldn't. Like, they just lost to Missouri. But the Vanderbilt win is looking a lot better. But against Vanderbilt, Katie, she scored? 36, 38 points. I thought she hit 40, but I think she was just shy of 40. I think it was 38. Maybe it was 30. It's high 30s. I know that for sure off the top of my head. But it goes without saying, but she's a tremendous player. And, of course, the thing about Alabama, though, it doesn't end there, right? There's Zay Green, who was a seventh-year senior, by the way. I just want to point that out. I mean, she's got, like, some injuries and some red shirts and whatnot and COVID years and who knows, but, she can probably be a doctor here in a few months, or getting pretty close. But regardless, 16.4 points, 5.1 rebounds, and 4.5 assists per game. So, even though she may be, getting close to following her 401k, Katie, she's a pretty good basketball player too.
Yeah, she is pretty good, but I do think that it's a little bit important to note that she kind of has a high turnover ratio. She has 64 turnovers on the season so far, and I was just looking at the stats in Alabama's loss to Texas. She had 9 turnovers. They lost by 44, which granted, Sarah Ashley Barker did not play, but she had 9 turnovers in that game, and that was probably one of their most important games of the season to kind of solidify their spot as one of those really good teams in the nation. But yeah, I mean, she's really good, and she's averaging nice efficiency, but I mean, what's the turnover ratio? It's not that great. So I think if Kentucky can take advantage of that and kind of put more pressure on her, they might be able to get her to crack a little bit and hopefully commit 9 turnovers again.
And that's actually a good thing, because I think there's one thing about Kentucky where it's like their perimeter defense is like, you don't know. But I do think our guards do a really good job of putting pressure on people at times. And of course, you talk about how she turns the ball over a lot. I would imagine you probably see that Thursday. Now, whether that translates to a win or not, you don't know, but that obviously would help Kentucky's chances if they can create turnovers. Aaliyah Nye, 13.8 points per game, shooting 42.3% from deep. So, Katie, she's just one of those players that can knock down the three. There's also Essence Cody, who, I like the name Essence. That's a nice name, That's, of all the names we've talked about previewing and recapping and all this, Essence Cody, it's one of the better names we've seen. 10.4 points per game, 6.4 rebounds per game. And then there's Carly Weathers, who averages 7.6 points and a team high 43.7% from deep. Katie, I think it's fair to say, don't let them shoot threes. And if they do, you might be in trouble. But Kentucky, I think the game plan should be, and probably is, to run them off the line, but really minimize the damage from beyond the arc, because they have a lot of shooters.
Yeah, I think this game is going to be very fast paced because you don't want to give them time to set a shot up on the perimeter. So I expect to see a lot of a lot of possessions in general for both teams. I think that it's going to go back and forth. I feel like it's going to be a very close game. This is not a game that we've talked about before where the opposing team has three decent players, maybe two. They have probably five really good, solid players that
Yeah.
Kentucky has to prepare for. So I think if they speed up the game a little bit and play how they know to play, it might make Alabama a little bit flustered. It might, cause a little bit of hesitation in their system. But I mean, I think that, like you said, they've obviously prepared for this game. So the plan is probably to run them off the three and make them shoot in the lane.
It's what you got to hope. And I think if you're Kentucky, in these next two games, you got to go 1-1 at minimum, and I think your best chance is against Alabama. But
Hmm.
Katie, there's no reason why you can't go win at Oklahoma. Of course, the Sooners are 16-4 overall and 4-3 in the SEC. Just kind of Oklahoma again. It feels like Oklahoma is kind of that border of, and again, this is Alabama, Kentucky, Oklahoma. Just kind of we're talking about those three teams specifically, are kind of all in that space where it's like you're not LSU and South Carolina, but you could be right there, And I think it's kind of a three horse race right now. Throw in a couple of other teams too, that or Texas is probably another team that's above Kentucky, and in that tier is South Carolina and LSU. But you talk about teams that like who can get a double bye in the SEC tournament or a bye, and Kentucky. You definitely have to think that they can get that if they can, at least go 1-1 in these next two games. But Oklahoma, preseason fourth team in the SEC. They have another first team All SEC player in Reagan Beers, who we're about to talk about. But Katie, that North Carolina game on the road. North Carolina, they were number 16 at the time. They're still around there, hovering in that top 15 range, kind of fluctuating week to week. Uh, when you look at the schedule, Katie, to this point, is Oklahoma the toughest game that Kentucky will have played, by the time we record next week? Like, is Oklahoma going to be the toughest game? Because that North Carolina game was tough, and we saw that with the result, obviously. But, I mean, is Oklahoma, you think, better? Like, is this going to be a harder game to win, in your opinion?
I do. I think that when SEC play starts, the stakes are always higher. I think that SEC games are always a little bit more heated, and Oklahoma has a great resume. I mean, they lost to Duke, but they beat Louisville. They beat Michigan. They lost to Texas by like five or six, and then they beat Tennessee. Uh, in Tennessee, I think they beat Tennessee. Yeah, and then but they did
Yes,
lose to
yeah.
Mississippi State, so that
True.
is a little that's something to remember. Like they're beating really good teams. They lost to Mississippi State, which was still a good team, but not as good as say Texas or South Carolina. And then they beat Texas A&M by 15, which of course shows that they were able to hold Texas A&M like Kentucky wasn't able to do. But yeah, I mean they lost to South Carolina by 40. I think easily South Carolina is the best team in the SEC, but for them to lose by 40, I think is uncharacteristic because I do think Oklahoma's better than that. So I don't know. I think that because it's in Oklahoma, I think obviously that puts Kentucky at not like they don't have the home court advantage, but I also think that it's just going to be more heated anyway because I'm sure that Oklahoma will have tons of fans and it's harder to play on the road anyway. So I do think that this is the toughest game that Kentucky has so far.
And it's also one of those things like, yeah, going on the road is tough. And it is, like, there's no doubt about that. But it also breeds for opportunity. It breeds
Hmm.
for, if you go win this game, that's your best win of the season so far. And that is, one of the better wins you could have. We said first team All SEC, Reagan Beers. She is a big that shoots over 40% from the 3 point line. You want to talk about just an athlete that, I don't know if she's first team All American because there's so many great bigs in the country, but she's definitely first team All SEC, and she's definitely pushing for being an All American. 16.7 points and 8.9 rebounds per game. I think it's pretty simple, Katie. Kentucky's bigs, you're going to be tested. Reagan Beers might be the best, outside of Anissa Morrow and what LSU has. And Reagan Beers is going to be the best big you face this season. Let's see what you can do against her.
Yeah, and I think it's crazy to even note that she's averaging almost 70% from the field. So she's a very consistent shooter and definitely I mean, Clara Strack is gonna have her hands full. I'm assuming that's probably who's gonna be guarding her. If not, maybe Tiani Key. I could see that as a matchup, but yeah, I mean, it's gonna be difficult to contain her. But I think that they've obviously, like I said about Alabama, this is the game plan. This is what they're focusing on. They know who the best player is and they know exactly what they need to do. So it's just a matter of execution at this point.
And then I think it's interesting. Matt G commented, "How do we get into our offense when athletic teams are smothering Georgia?" And I think it's a good question because that's what Oklahoma is. They're an athletic team, and I think it's pretty clear Georgia's going to be the focal point. And someone who I worry about, Katie, who could maybe have a good effect on Georgia is Peyton Verhulst, who has been, I think, one of the more surprising talents for Oklahoma. Maybe not. Maybe not one of the best guards in the country, but definitely one of the better ones in the SEC. And, I don't know if they expected that going into the season, to be honest. But, who cares about expectations, Katie, when you're putting up 14.5 points, 5.6 rebounds, and almost 4 assists a game?
Yeah, and especially with Peyton Verhulst, she played at Louisville for her first 2 years of college, so she has that experience in the ACC, and then she played in the Big 12 last season, so she has a very diverse experience chart. Like she has been all over the place, and of course she's been at Oklahoma for 2 years in a row. But I think that with her having that Big 12 experience, it's definitely helped her become such a great player in the SEC.
And, to answer Matt's question about how do you get into the offense, I think it's just like, well, first of all, don't do what you did at Texas A&M, where if she's 0 of 5 from 3, just keep throwing them up. Like, there's a point where, like, Georgia, if you can't hit your shot, pass the ball. But I do think it's fair to say, like, Kenny's offense, I think there are, yes, times when it can get stagnant, and, obviously you don't love that. But there are also some sets they run and some things they do that get other shooters open. They get other people open. And you have tremendous scorers like Deja Lawrence and someone like Amelia Hassett who can just get hot. When teams are smothering Georgia, I think the good thing about her is that she's the best passer in college basketball. So it shouldn't be, ideally, not too hard for her to kind of negate that with the talent she has around her, too.
Yeah, I agree with that, especially because, again, this is something that they prepared for. Georgia has been double, triple teamed since the beginning of the season because every other team is scared of her. So, like you said, to have a diverse list of shooters that Georgia can look to, I think that with a team like Oklahoma, I don't feel like they're going to be as focused on containing Georgia because now they have to contain Deja and they also have to contain Amelia and they also have to contain Clara. So it's very hard to know like maybe what they're going to do when they go into this game, but I think that Georgia will have chances and I think that everyone else will have chances. So for Oklahoma to be an athletic team, I think that I don't know. I just feel like they're going to diversify their defense a little bit. I don't think it's going to be all focused on her.
My final note on Oklahoma, Katie, and this is the part that scares me the most. They have 6 players that average north of 20 minutes per game and 10 players that average double-digit minutes per game. So it's one of those things where Oklahoma's deep, Kentucky is not. But, Katie, I think if you're Kenny Brooks, one thing you do know, your starting 5 is about as good as any starting 5 there is in the country. You can lean on them, and you have done it all season. And, I said Kentucky has to go 1-1. I don't think there's any reason, Katie, Kentucky can't go 2-0 here in this 2-game stretch coming up.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting to see what Oklahoma can do against LSU. They play tomorrow night. So I'm excited to see that because I feel like that's going to give us a good grasp of what they might do against Kentucky. And I think that based on how that game goes, I think it's going to affect what happens when they play Kentucky.
Is that at Oklahoma or LSU?
It's in LSU.
It's at LSU. Okay. Well, obviously it's hard to win down in the Bayou. Everyone knows that. But I do think it's interesting to note that like you said, it'll be good to see. I didn't realize that game. I didn't realize that was their matchup tomorrow. But Oklahoma LSU, it's obviously a big time game. Can they hold up against the Tigers? One loss at this point to the season. We'll see. You're going to need Reagan Beers or some of your other players to really step up, and that's kind of the thing about them too. Like between Beers and Verhulst, like it's really just them who are like the big time scorers.
Mm-hmm.
But they're such a well-rounded team, and that, Katie, worries me a little bit. But Katie, at the same time, we've seen Kentucky pull off wins we didn't think that they would get before. The Mark Pope show is starting up pretty much right now, so we're gonna go ahead and just kind of wrap things up. Easy segue from Memorial Memo, Mark Pope show, and the Kenny Brooks show starts at 7 o'clock. So, Katie, before we get out of here, do you have anything to say? Because we have 2 games coming up, and, hopefully Cats go 2-0.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there's no reason that Kentucky shouldn't go 2-0, so just hoping for a couple victories heading into the hardest stretch of the season. So I guess we'll see.
And there you go, Katie. Kentucky, plays Alabama on Thursday, and then, of course, on Sunday, Oklahoma. Hopefully next time we record, Kentucky goes 2-0 in that stretch and is sitting pretty at, what would it be? I'm bad at records. That would be 19-2, and then what's that in the SEC? 19-2, and overall, what's that in the SEC, Katie? They're 6-1,
6-1.
so it'd be 8-1. It'd be 8-1, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not good at math. Anyway, may not be good at math, but the Cats are definitely good at basketball. Again, big game on Thursday, big game on Sunday. Hopefully the Cats come through that unscathed. Thank you all for watching this episode of the Memorial Memo. Of course, I'm Phoenix Stevens alongside Katie Hutchison. We will see you all next time.